Hey everyone, and welcome to my mostly Sci-Fi September book roundup. But before I get into the book reviews, I have a quick channel announcement I'd like to share with all of you. So I've been alluding to a channel collaboration over the last few months. I'm collaborating with 3 other booktubers. We're going to be reading a very big fantasy series, and I've kept you in suspense. Well, we're about to announce this collaboration and the series we're going to read, and it's going to be a bit of a read-along as well. But it's not going to be on my channel. So if you haven't already, subscribe to Tall Guy Reads, which is Alex's channel. If you don't already subscribe to Alex's channel, you should because he's awesome. But beyond that, we have a video discussion that's going to upload probably on Tuesday with the 4 of us that are collaborating on this big book series, as well as a special guest that I'm sure all of you will recognize. I'm not going to reveal the special guest or the other booktubers or the series because I want you to tune in and keep you in suspense a little bit longer. But that video should upload on Tuesday, and it'll be something that will be driving a lot of the choices that I read, what I read in 2023. So check out Alex's channel, and I'll see you over there on Tuesday. Okay, let's roll the intro, and then we'll talk about what I read in September. So it was a mostly sci-fi September for me. 6 of the 10 things that I read this month were in the science fiction genre. If you're new to these monthly wrap-ups, I like to group them by genre, so I will talk about the non-sci-fi first, and I will put chapters below. So if you want to skip a certain genre or skip to a certain genre, feel free to do that. Just make sure you come back at the end for the book of the month, because it is a work that is one of the best works of science fiction I've read, and I bet a lot of you haven't read it before. So let's get started with a book by Genevieve Gornichek called The Witch's Heart. This was an audiobook that I listened to this month, and this is a Norse retelling about Angerboda, who is a witch who is a secret wife of Loki. And this was an interesting story because the first half of the book was a lot of slice of life type storytelling of Angerboda living in this cave, and Loki sometimes visits, and she has a friend that's a giant that sometimes visits. Loki and Angerboda have some children. They're very interesting children. If you don't know Norse mythology like I don't, you'll be really surprised by the nature of their offspring. But it was kind of slow, to be honest. But about halfway through, I was finally waiting for something really interesting to happen, to get out of kind of the doldrums of this slice of life storytelling, and the last half of it got very interesting to me. I mostly enjoyed it. I wonder if I would have enjoyed it more had I read it rather than listened to the audiobook, because I wasn't 100% enamored with the narration. But overall, I did like The Witch's Heart, and I gave it a 3 out of 5. Okay, on to the fantasy genre next. First one I want to talk about is Shadows of Self. This is the second book of Mistborn Era 2. If you saw my review of Alloy of Law, these are rereads. My reread of Alloy of Law, I was a bit disappointed. I didn't feel it held up at least what I'd remembered from the first time I read it. I, of course, am rereading these books because The Lost Metal, the 4th and final book of the series, is being released in November. Well, thankfully, Shadows of Self was a lot more like I remembered it, a better book than Alloy of Law, and I enjoyed most of it. I thought the characterization was a lot stronger, and I felt that there was a much more compelling story. Alloy of Law, there wasn't really that compelling of a plot, in my opinion, but Shadows of Self, I think, raised the stakes quite a bit more. But what I enjoy most about this book, both on the first time I read it and on the reread, is its connections with the first trilogy. I love Mistborn Era 1, the first trilogy, and I loved seeing some of the immortal characters back in this book, as well as just references to the first trilogy, talking about the characters, talking about the aftermath of the events at the end of the 3rd book. So I really enjoyed Shadows of Self. I gave it a 4 out of 5, and I'm definitely looking forward to the Bands of Mourning next month, because when I read the 3 books, I felt that each book got better as the stakes were raised. So I'm definitely looking forward to the Bands of Mourning and, of course, The Lost Metal in the next 2 months. All right, the next book in the fantasy genre is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Now, I already did a review for this, so I did a dual review with this and the next book, which is Babel by R.F. Kuang. The reason I did that is these monthly wrap-ups, I generally talk for about 1 to 2 minutes per book. And I wanted to talk just a little bit longer about this book, but I didn't want to give it a full review. So I'll be very brief. If you haven't checked out that dual review, go check that out. I talk about this book for about 5 minutes. But I'll just say very succinctly that I loved the beginning, I loved the ending, and I felt that King lost his way in the middle. And I felt it was a bit of a missed opportunity, even though I did like a lot of this book. But overall, I gave Fairy Tale a 3.5 out of 5. If you want to hear more thoughts about that, please go check out that dual review. That is a format that I will continue going forward when I encounter these books that I want to talk about more than a minute or two, but don't want to devote a full review to them. And of course, the other half of that dual review was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I'll say once again, this is a thematic home run. I love the themes within this, the tale of the immigrants, the fish out of water tale. You get racism, you get sexism, you get classism, you get colonialism, imperialism. There's interesting magic that is centered around etymology and translation that I found fascinating. And I really enjoyed Babel by R.F. Kuang. And again, if you want to hear my full thoughts on this book, check out that dual review. But I did give Babel by R.F. Kuang a 4.5 out of 5. Okay, it was mostly Sci-Fi September, so let's talk about the things that I read in the science fiction genre, starting with the Empire novels of Isaac Asimov. First of all, notice that it's not the Empire trilogy, it's the Empire novels, and that's an important distinction because these are 3 totally unconnected stories. In fact, even the connection to the Galactic Empire, which is part of the universe of Asimov's Foundation novels and his robot novels, it's very sparse. In fact, it really is until the 3rd book that you get much of that fleshed out, and I think that's the first time that the capital of the Galactic Empire, Trantor, is even written in name. I will say that these were a disappointment for me, and I'll talk about each one, but they were overall a little bit disappointing. I love the Foundation series. It is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, science fiction series. And I enjoyed the robot novels quite a bit. So this let me down a little bit with those higher expectations. So the first book is called The Stars Like Dust, and it was Asimov's first or second novel, I believe. And frankly, it shows, because I found nothing compelling in this story. And I hate to be negative like that, but I didn't like the protagonist. I didn't like the story. I didn't like the world building. Asimov's prose has never been one of his strengths. And this was a book that the only saving grace is it was short. Because when I got to the end, the last paragraph actually made me groan out loud. So The Stars Like Dust is a very skippable book, in my opinion. I gave it 2 out of 5. Now, the second of the Empire novels is called The Currents of Space. Now, The Currents of Space had a very interesting premise. It's the story of an amnesiac, and this man who's on this planet, he's not from this planet, but he has amnesia. So he's trying to figure out who he is, why he has amnesia, where he is, what's going on, as are all the people around him. But the execution was lacking in this one. It was evident that Asimov was new to the long form because he was almost experimenting with the form and experimenting with point of view. Because every chapter had a different heading of a different person whose point of view told the narrative. And even in Asimov's more mature works, I wouldn't say he's a great character writer. Asimov's great at ideas. I love the ideas in the Foundation novels above all. But he's not always the best character writer. So each chapter starting with kind of a new 2-dimensional character, what it did is it really dragged the narrative down. Every time something ramped up and it got good, the next chapter we had to be introduced superficially to a new narrator. And it was just kind of a disappointing read. Not quite as low rated for me as The Stars Like Dust, but I did give The Currents of Space a 2.5 out of 5. Now, the third book, Pebble in the Sky, was easily the best of the 3. We got a great idea and great execution of a great idea. The Pebble in the Sky takes a man from 20th century Earth, and there's a kind of a scientific mistake, and it throws him thousands of years into the future into this galactic empire. So he's trying to figure out what's going on, the people around him trying to figure out who he is, what's going on. There's a lot of interesting kind of political intrigue in there, and I enjoyed Pebble in the Sky. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I will say, though, if I ever do a big reread, which I probably will because I love to reread, if I do a big reread of all the Asimov multiverse books in order, I'll read the robot novels, I'll only read Pebble in the Sky, and then I'll read all the Foundation novels. I think the first 2 Empire novels, unfortunately, are a bit skippable, but they are short, so it's not like it took a big amount of time for me to read through these. But I did enjoy Pebble in the Sky, and I'm still a big Asimov fan, even despite the lower ratings for 2 of these books. All right, up next we have Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. This is the second book that Orson Scott Card wrote in all of the Enders books that he has published, which I'm rereading kind of in chronological order in world, not publication order. But I already did a full review on Speaker for the Dead. The one thing that you really want to know about this book, because it is kind of a direct sequel to Ender's Game, is how different it is. And I addressed that in that video, but very briefly, it's a much slower paced narrative. The stakes are a lot different. There's still good thematic depth in there, but it doesn't feel like it's at all related to Ender's Game. And I think that's important going in. But if you like a slow, more philosophical type of science fiction story that has at its heart biology regarding an alien race, this might be a great book for you. Overall, I really did enjoy it, and I gave Speaker for the Dead 4 out of 5. But if you want to see my full review, I'll put a link in the description below. All right, one more before my book of the month, and that is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, this is a book that many people consider the finest work in the science fiction genre. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people, but I am of the minority opinion. So my criticism of these books, just take that as it is. Most people probably disagree with my assessment of this book, but here's my assessment of this book. It's told in 3 parts, and I loved 2 of the 3 parts. So the premise behind Childhood's End is that an alien race visits Earth. And the opening scenes remind me of that movie Independence Day, where these ships just hover above all the big cities in the world, except they're not here to attack. They start to communicate with us, they come in peace, and essentially tell Earth, we will reveal ourselves to you in 50 years. Clean yourself up. So get rid of the national and the religious lines and come together as one unified Earth. And that's kind of the first part of the book. The second part of the book deals with meeting the aliens for the first time, who have an appearance that surprises a lot of humanity. It also deals with this utopia that's been created on Earth, and I love that part of it as well. It was the third part of this book that just lost me. The third part deals with why the aliens are there, and they find out why these overlords are there, and I understand why people loved it, but I thought it was okay. I didn't love the solution to it. There were parts of the ending I really enjoyed, a couple oh wow moments, but overall, I just wasn't real high on the ending of this book. So for me, unfortunately, Childhood's End is only a 3 out of 5. But your rating may differ. Don't let me dissuade you from picking it up. It's only about 200 pages, so it's a quick read. And I did love a lot of it. The ending just didn't work for me. And on to my book of the month. I have talked about this once on my channel. If you saw my Hidden Gems video, you heard me talk about Replay by Ken Grimwood. So I am going to repeat myself a little bit from what I said in that video. Replay is one of those great science fiction ideas that is executed extremely well. In this book, Jeff Winston, he's 43 years old and dies on the first page. And then he's reborn, and he's 18 years old, and he's in his dorm room to replay his life. And you see from the cover blurb what if you could live your life over again and again and again? So it's not a spoiler to say that he goes through this loop from 18 to 43 several times in this book. What is most fascinating to me about this book is the fact that Jeff is evolving, but he keeps becoming 18 years old. But he's not 18 years old. He's physically 18 years old. But the first time he's 43. The second time he's 68. The third time he's 93. So he's a much different person every time he restarts this journey. And seeing his evolution was fascinating. Additionally, about a third of the way through the book, there's a new wrinkle that's introduced that makes the storytelling even better than that premise. And I will say, because I had a friend that saw this video and asked me, it sounds like it's awfully repetitive. It's so well paced, so well plotted that only the important features of each replay are told. He doesn't always tell you what happens the minute that he wakes up and he's 18 again. And he doesn't tell you the whole through narrative like the first couple replays. So it never felt repetitive. It never felt that it was just retreading, what happened each time. And it was fascinating. And like all great books, when I'm getting towards the end, I was getting nervous thinking, how is he going to end this? And how is this going to end well? Well, he stuck the landing. I know recency bias is a big thing, so I'm not going to say this definitively, but I think this is one of the top 5 works of science fiction I've ever read. I'll give it a few months to think about it. I am going to do a top 10 science fiction works next year. So by the time I film that video, I will probably know whether this is a top 5, top 10 book for me. But I loved Replay by Ken Grimwood. I think you should pick it up. It's easily my book of the month this month. Easy 5 out of 5. Okay, well, that was my September. Did you read any science fiction in September? If so, let me know what you read in the comment section below. Or beyond that, just tell me the best thing that you read in September. And if any of you have read Replay, I'd love to talk with you about it, because I know very few people that have actually read this book. So drop me a line in the comment section below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.